Sandpaper Project is an art project by Lindsay Jane McBride Gibson. The project is multiple. It has multiple origins and is unfolding in multiple ways. Its core is the painting on sandpaper of the names of the people who were accused of witchcraft in Scotland. Here's Lindsay about to paint another one. The author, Roy Pugh, is a writer of local history, biographies and novels. In 2001, he wrote The Deil's Ain, the story of witch persecution in Scotland. Roy writes from the heart, and when he delved into the gruesome surviving 16th, 17th and 18th century records, he emerged with not only facts, but living, breathing stories too. One aspect that The Deil's Ain addresses is the interesting differences between Scotland and the rest of the UK and Europe in regards to witch persecution. In the rest of the UK and Europe, it was the Roman Catholic Church, which was the religious organisation actively supporting the witch hunts and trials. But in Scotland, it was the Presbyterian Church of Scotland, the Kirk. The number of accusations, trials and deaths in Scotland were higher than anywhere else in the world. The book contains a shocking appendix of page after page of the thousands of names of women and men who'd been accused of witchcraft. This list has planted a number of seeds. In 2016, the Edinburgh International Centre for Spirituality and Peace held a conference on the subject of the divine feminine in Scotland. Lillian Helen Brazoska is a Celtic bard, and she was invited to make a contribution to the programme. Lillian held what was entitled A Ceremony of Remembering the Divine Feminine in People and Communities. It was rooted in recorded history by the proclamation of the names of those women and men who'd been accused of witchcraft, read straight from the appendix of Roy's book. Lillian started at the beginning and recited the names for all to hear. Lillian's quarter-of-an-hour slot in the programme reached its end long before she reached the end of the list. By 2018, Lindsay was running regular Creativity for Wellbeing workshops. These are events where participants take an intuitive, expressive and cooperative approach in exploring the art-making process. Lindsay had already held workshops in several different venues and had noted how each different place and space contributed differently to each workshop. Curious about the possibility of finding an ideal home for the workshops, Lindsay picked 4 attractive venues and in the January and February of 2018 ran a series of 4 workshops, each one held in a strikingly different place. The first was held in the drawing room at Edinburgh Palette in St Margaret's House. The Palette is a large hub for the creative arts. It is a place where there are both working studios and galleries, plus various community and art spaces. There is room for the embodiment of language and for the non-verbal language of art. The second was held on February the 2nd at the Salisbury Centre, a centre for the development of people's spiritual, psychological and creative growth. Here there is access to a wonderful garden, and here Lindsay first used sandpaper in a piece of process art. This is the pot of rainbow at the end of the gold. A couple of strands of the gold are made from sandpaper. The third was held at Summerhall, a huge complex for arts and events. Summerhall hosts the DeMarco Archive. The archive contains many items that bring to life the seminal post-war artist from Germany, Joseph Beuys. Beuys visited Scotland several times in the 1970s and 80s, making site-specific and performance art whilst here. Beuys worked in many mediums. Here is his 1959 drawing entitled Witches Spitting Fire. Beuys had a fascination with energy, and he investigated the role of humanity's changing relationship to using energy as that which is precipitating environmental crises. In his work, Beuys extends the definition of art to include the artist as shaman, and to call for art's role in shaping a better world. Beuys' work draws attention to our deepest concerns. Lindsay is deeply inspired by the life and work of Joseph Beuys, and she was absolutely delighted to be planning to hold a workshop at a venue with such connections, even if the connections were not obviously direct or particularly visible. However, on arrival at Summerhall, the room that Lindsay had booked had been freshly decorated with wall-to-wall photographs of Beuys. The fourth was held in the garden room of Broughton St Mary's Parish Church. This is a traditional Church of Scotland kirk, which in recent years has modernised by developing its basement and adding an extension in the form of a garden room. The workshop took place in both the garden room and the garden. It was on this day that Lindsay was asked about the people who weren't there. The people who would like to come to a Creativity for Wellbeing workshop, but who wouldn't risk stepping into the consecrated premises of an unrepentant religious organisation. Lindsay took that question home with her, mulled it over long and hard, and the Sandpaper Project is her answer to that question.
Lindsay began at the beginning, alphabetically speaking. She started with those whose surname begins with the letter A. Some women's individual names have been lost, and they are only mentioned in relation to their husband or brother or place of residence. Other women are recorded as having more than one name, for example, an official name and a casual one. Lilias Adey is one such woman. She is also known as Toryburn Jean. In photographing the names made so far, Lindsay displayed the names in a flow, as if they were spilling out from Roy's book. The structure for this display is an homage to Joseph Beuys' 1969 installation, The Pack. In this work, 24 sledges flow from the back of a camper van. Each sledge is basic, but essential. It is a survival kit composed of the energy required to bring change in society. When the remembrances for those whose surname begins with the letter A were all completed, they formed a river.
E.
Meanwhile, on the other side of the Firth of Forth, the legacy of none other than Toryburn Jean was inspiring a group of women to gather and work together on awareness raising and memorial creation. In May 2019, they held a multifaceted conference on the subject of Remembering the Accused Witches of Scotland. Lindsay took the Sandpaper Project to the conference, and she invited people to come and join in with the painting. The intention was that it would be surnames started with the letter B that would be painted. But some of the women had been conducting genealogical research. They had found people in their own family trees who had lost their lives through being accused of witchcraft. And so it was an honour for the project to step away from a purely alphabetical order and to pay respect to these women's ancestors, no matter what letter their surname started with. The Sandpaper Project was then invited to a very special place. The decommissioned police box on Leith Walk is run as a community events resource. The police box itself is on a bridge, and it is right beside the area formerly known as Gallowlee. When the Scottish legal system still had recourse to capital punishment, Gallowlee had been a local execution site. Perhaps the area's name is no longer in use by way of an attempt to cover up its grisly history. Records show that, under Scots law, 11 women had been executed on the charge of witchcraft at this place. On the 2nd of February 2020, the community joined in with respectfully remembering their names.
Addressing the legacy of the witch trials at a local level seems to happen in many and various intense bursts of activity. Much like the madness of the witch trials themselves, it is activity which flares up in one locale. Matters get somewhat addressed, then the energy fades and life returns to how it was before. This has left an interesting scattering of multiple points of focus throughout the country. These include leaflets and booklets, there are memorial stones, commemorative plaques, and waymarked trails. There are portraits, murals and sculptures, and there have been songs, stories, ceremonies and plays. More recently, there are short films, podcasts and even conferences. Some of the focal points are very much live and active. But others have had short lifespans and are already crumbling remembrances of remembrances. Every activity represents a journey, and the journey that each person and each community takes is as a living strand in the process of coming to terms with our past. Why do these past cruelties still have the power to catch our attention? They are like open wounds. The hope is that when sufficient, informed, kind awareness is brought to bear on this collective trauma, such love and compassion can be like a healing poultice resting gently on the wound. Amongst all the local activity, there are often calls for national attention. Back in 1894, the pioneer environmentalist Patrick Geddes commissioned the premier artist of the Celtic Revival, John Duncan, to design a memorial fountain. The fountain drew on the wells of the Scottish capital city of Edinburgh and provided drinking water to the living. Sadly, the fountain is not maintained. No water flows through it. The flowers you see are provided by a kind volunteer who had seen it being used as an ashtray once too often. Let us visit Glencoe. The name is possibly derived from the Celtic Cool, C-A-O-L, which means narrow, or it may be related to a long history of poetics, the kind of poetry that is deeply rooted in the land, part of a bardic tradition. The River Coe runs through the glen from east to west, from the head of the glen down to Loch Leven. Loch Leven is one of the many sea lochs of the west coast. To the east of the glen is the high, boggy plateau of Rannoch Moor. Here is Joseph Boyce on the moor in 1970. He has sculpted a heart from gelatin and is holding it symbolically above the moor's surface. Some sources say he buried it in the ground. Where the glen meets the loch, this carved wooden figure was found gently buried in the ground. She dates from 600 years BC, which makes her 2,500 years old. That's a lot of generations. Although she is sometimes called the Ballachulish goddess, She now resides in Edinburgh, in the Early Peoples section of the National Museum of Scotland. Her eyes of quartzite pebbles have to strain further to see the beautiful West Coast. However, she has not lost her capacity for inspiration. Lindsay tells me that the next step of the Sandpaper Project involves the acquisition of 5 feet of alder wood. Then will come the carving and the sanding, and then the project will culminate with a journey over the moor, through the glen and onto the shore at Ballachulish.